reward enough hypothesis by Sutton et al., I think is a very powerful conceptual framework by which you can understand intelligence. So what they say is that if an agent is defined as a thing that is pursuing a goal, then the best way to achieve that is by defining a reward function that gives it a scalar reward, and the reward function is such that it leads towards the pursuing of the goal. So for example, a squirrel has as a goal to reduce hunger, and it develops a very complex set of skills and intelligences to be able to achieve that, dealing with nuts, having vision, also running away from predators, things like that. Now, I think the fundamental idea of reward is enough hypothesis per se is very strong. I think it opens up a few questions. For example, like how do you define goals, and if so, is it enough to just have one goal, or maybe you have a set of goals? Those are open questions. But I wanted to actually connect the hypothesis with investing and use David Deutsch's definition of wealth as the ultimate goal. So here's the thought. So the purpose of Orange Capital Partners, our firm, is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. So the reason I'm saying that is that I think any wealth management firm, at least a firm that is honest to its core, should have wealth creation at the core of its goal. So if that's not your goal, you're not in the business of investing, you're not a hedge fund, you're something else, and that's fine. I'm just saying that if you want to call yourself a hedge fund, you better be in the business of wealth creation. So wealth is the goal, right? So then the question is, what is wealth? And I think David Deutsch's definition of wealth actually is very useful here. It is the possible physical transformations. So basically, wealth is more if you have more possible physical transformations, and wealth is less if you have less. So it's a quantifiable term that can be optimized for, and therefore, the more possible physical transformations you have, the wealthier you are. So as a hedge fund now, what do? We channel capital towards situations that increase the possible physical transformations. Now the question, how do you do that? And I think there's two extreme examples. One I want to call Tesla, and the other fusion energy. And just to illustrate that even if you have such a definition, and even if you do the right thing, which is pursuing your goals, if you want to use the reinforcement learning paradigm and the reward is enough hypothesis by Sutton et al., I think you're still in a sort of a troubled situation if you are pursuing the fusion energy goal, because that's a very sparse reward system. You have zero reward until you actually reach the goal. Now, in my preceding episode where I spoke about the many world interpretation of AI, you could argue that in principle, you could get to, if you could simulate many, if not infinite amounts of approaches towards fusion energy, you would eventually find the most efficient one, or the most Kolmogorov efficient one, and therefore the most intelligent one, which is the algorithm with the shortest sequence of bits that gets you to that particular goal. But in practice today, as a hedge fund, we don't have that kind of compute power. We don't have those types of world models. So we choose Tesla as an example of how to achieve the goal of maximizing wealth using reward and the potential transformation paradigm as a guiding principle. So what do we mean with that? Tesla as a company operates exactly like that. So you kind of stepwise get rewarded for certain actions in order to increase your potential for transformations. So, Master Plan 4 was published this week, and it actually very nicely illustrates the strategy. So, for example, Tesla built the Roadster, which is the first instantiation of Tesla, it gets rewarded with a positive reward because the Roadster generates enough cash flow to pursue the next potential physical transformation, which is design the Model S. It gets rewarded again because the Model S is cash flow positive, gets them to profitability, and allows them to learn how to go into mass production. Now, that path from Model S to Model 3 is a bit more bumpy. It gets some negative rewards and gets reinforced towards a better strategy, for example, not automate everything and things like that, but Model 3 production hell eventually gets them to Model Y, and then we have the energy business. And I hope you get my point here, that it's a step-by-step reinforcement strategy where each step gets a reward, and the reward, of course, is not just 0 and 1. It's the market, customers, cash flow. There's a lot of factors which go into this reward function. But in principle, you could in principle formulate this reward into one scalar. You could just say like +1 is it's good enough for the next possible transformation, and every transformation that Tesla enables more than just one transformation. So when they built the Model 3, they were able to build the Model Y, but also the Cybertruck. And with the Cybertruck, they started doing 4680, which allows them to do mega block. And you can see also how this is proliferating into more than just one option. So what I'm saying is here, not every possible transformation just increases the next set of possible transformations by one and makes them bigger. It also gets more possible transformations. So in that sense, I think Tesla is a great example of how wealth can be generated in a, let's call it, more intelligent way. It's an easier algorithm to deal with than, let's say, the fusion energy algorithm, which is an incredibly complex algorithm. We actually don't even know how to do it. We have to invest billions and billions of dollars. In other words, there's billions and billions of mistakes we can make, and lose a lot of money, suck more government money in it, create more bureaucracy, actually reduce our ability to error correct, because the less successful we are, the more government funding we need, which means that we will go from market-driven decision, natural sanctions, towards human sanctions. So when humans start deciding what is good and what is bad versus markets and natural experiments and things like that, then the potential for error correction actually decreases, and then you basically end up in a bureaucratic nightmare with no results. So to summarize, the reward is enough hypothesis can be actually nicely applied to investing. And Tesla is a great example. It's not the only example. I think NVIDIA is another great example. There's a famous quote by Jensen Huang. It's not famous, actually, but it's something that I paid attention to, and it stuck in my head. In one of the analyst days about 10, 12 years ago, he said, we have a day job. And I think that was the most important quote that for me, that's the time when we decided to put a substantial position into NVIDIA, because we realized, yeah, that's true. They're building an AI infrastructure, but they have a day job, which back then was graphics and stuff like that. And the stock wasn't priced dramatically for AI. So you had a pretty good cushion. In other words, you had already gotten a good reward for what they did until then, which is graphics, chips, and things like that. And now you had all this other optionality. In other words, the wealth was there. It just wasn't priced. Therefore, it was a good investment. And very similarly today, Tesla has a day job. They sell cars. They sell energy products. And they have a lot of potential transformations to come, in particular driven by AI. Now, some of that is priced already. So in other words, you're already paying for that wealth that is in the company. But nevertheless, I think it's a good metaphor. It's also a good guideline. It's a good blueprint to think about how to invest in companies. There's other companies out there. I don't want to dwell only on those two, but those are the ones we follow very closely because we're invested in them. There's certainly other potential investments. For example, Bitcoin has that same characteristic of increasing potential transformation for society and the world, and therefore is incredibly valuable. So to summarize, David Deutsch's definition of wealth is very useful in the wealth business, And I think we can use it really well also to combine wealth generation with the reward is enough hypothesis by Sutton. By the way, just as a tangent here, I think we can't underestimate enough how important it is to have a definition of intelligence when we're in the knowledge business, right? Because that's what we do. We are trying to be intelligent about stuff. So having a definition about what intelligence actually means and having a blueprint of how we can create complex intelligences from simple rewards, I think it's really helpful. It's very, very refreshing to have an idea. I'm not there yet to be able to program AGI or anything like that, but at least